Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn, permanently protecting Maine's coast from offshore drilling. Our communities rely on Maine's more than 3,000 miles of coastline, as well as a clean, healthy ocean to thrive. But right now, our ocean remains vulnerable to the expansion of dirty and dangerous offshore drilling. From toxic oil spills that shut down fisheries to the decades of fossil fuel emissions new drilling would lock in, offshore drilling is a bad deal for Maine. But right now, legislation is being considered that would permanently protect our coast from offshore drilling, securing the environmental and economic health of communities that have previously been left vulnerable to the threat of drilling. Nancy Downs is with us today. Nancy is the Senior New England Field Representative for Oceana, which is the largest international organization dedicated to protecting and restoring the world's oceans on a global scale. Here in the US, which has the most extensive national waters in the world, Oceana is dedicated to making sure those waters are healthy and productive for generations to come. And offshore drilling poses a direct threat to that goal. Nancy, we are so grateful to have you with us today to share what's at stake here in Maine and how we can protect our coast once and for all.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you so much for inviting Oceana to present to the Maine conservation voters. I think Ben is my coworker is going to put up our slides.
Yeah, give me just a second, Nancy, just to remind everybody what our plan is for today. I'm Kathleen Neal. I'm the Director of Policy and Partnerships here at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations represent more than 13,000 members and supporters dedicated to protecting Maine's environment and our democracy. A few technical notes for today. We're going to turn it over to Nancy and Ben in just a moment and let them run through the slides and the presentation. We'll get to questions after the presentation, but as always, you can send those questions to me through the chat whenever they occur to you, and I will keep track of them for the Q&A at the end. We ask that you not message speakers directly, as we want their focus on the presentation, not the chat box. You can message Will Sedlak if you have any technical difficulties. Just want to make sure everybody knows the event is being recorded. You'll be able to find the video posted on our website later this afternoon, where you can also find recordings of all of our previous Lunch and Learns. Thanks again for joining us. And Nancy, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kathleen. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm just grateful that everyone chose to spend their lunchtime with Oceana and learning about offshore oil drilling. Again, as Kathleen said, I am the Senior Field Representative for Oceana in New England. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm zooming in today from the town of Millis, Massachusetts. I'd like to briefly acknowledge that the ground beneath my feet was historically the home of the Nipmuc and Massachusetts people. And I know many of you are zooming in from Maine, so I encourage you to learn more about the indigenous tribes in your area. Thanks again for joining us. Oceana was founded in 2001. Next slide, please. It's the world's largest ocean advocacy organization focused on restoring the resilience, diversity, and abundance of marine ecosystems. And we achieve measurable change by conducting targeted science-based campaigns with fixed deadlines and articulated goals. We're dedicated to protecting and restoring the world's oceans on a global scale, and we have locations established strategically around the globe. We seek to make our oceans as rich, healthy, and abundant as they once were. We achieve our goals by identifying key decision makers and then leveraging science, law, grassroots engagement, advocacy, and strategic communications to win victories for our oceans. So today, I'm going to talk to you about offshore drilling in our nation's federal waters. But first, in order to do that, we need to do some storytelling to get you from 2010 to present day. So I'd like to go back a few years ago to March of 2010, when President Barack Obama's administration proposed drilling in the Atlantic in a small area off the coast of Virginia. The political outlook was considered bleak for stopping this plan. Many coastal governors supported offshore drilling, and President Obama even presented the plan as in line with the will of coastal states. But this plan stopped dead in its tracks just 1 month later. I'm sure all of you remember, on April 20 of 2010, the BP Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded in the Gulf of Mexico, killing 11 people and spilling over 200 million gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico. It was the worst oil spill in US history and one of also the worst environmental disasters in world history. So not only did 11 rig workers lose their lives, so did untold millions of marine mammals, sea turtles, birds, and fish. While the world watched helpless, oil gushed into one of the planet's most biodiverse marine habitats for 87 long days before being capped. Deep sea coral, common loons, and spotted sea trout populations are still struggling. And for some species, it's just too early to tell definitively what the impact will be for these longer-lived species like dolphins, whales, and sea turtles. The Deepwater Horizon spill resulted in numerous socioeconomic impacts as well, and they're still being studied today. That includes effects on the fishing, tourism, transportation sectors, and other impacts affecting long-term public health issues and overall community vulnerability and resilience. Needless to say, the plan to drill in the Atlantic was scrapped in the aftermath of BP. President Obama put a pause on all new drilling, and this unfortunate event significantly changed perspectives on the risk and impacts of offshore oil drilling. But we knew it was only a matter of time before the East Coast was under threat again. So, although new drilling leases had been paused, Oceana anticipated that the East Coast could still face the threat of offshore drilling in the near future and began organizing against seismic air gun blasting. This is the precursor to offshore drilling, and we started organizing in East Coast states. This photo is from a rally taken October of 2012. At this time, the Department of Interior was reviewing proposals to use seismic air guns to search for pockets of oil and gas in a huge expanse of ocean from Delaware down to Florida. The effect of these round-the-clock tests, which run for days on end with dynamite-like blasts firing at 10-second intervals, can be devastating to marine mammals and fish alike. According to even the Department of Interior's own assessment, opening that area to seismic airgun testing would have injured over 138,000 dolphins and whales, including the critically endangered North Atlantic right whale. Testing would also cause 13.5 million disruptions to marine mammals during such vital behaviors as feeding, calving, and breeding. And we all know that this type of testing helps no one except for the oil and gas industry at a great expense to the animals that call this ocean home. And if you look at the graphic, if you're not familiar with seismic testing, behind the boat, there's usually an array of these air guns that are drawn behind the boat. It sends an incredibly loud signal down to the seafloor. And depending on the density of the floor, whether it's bedrock or has pockets of oils, it will send a different signal back up for the equipment to read the signal. But it is extremely disruptive to marine mammals, and in some cases can be fatal. Next slide, thank you. So this brings us to ground zero for Oceana's, really kickstarting Oceana's campaign on drilling. And it goes back to fall of 2013. In a tiny little town of Kure Beach, North Carolina, the mayor, Dean Lambeth, wrote a letter in support of offshore drilling without talking to other council members or his constituents, and he sent it to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. Oceana had a senior organizer in the area, Randy Sturgill, who found out about this and partnered with other local organizations to spread the word via community groups and on social media. Well, there was so much public outcry, the town scheduled a public meeting on the topic in response to this. Next slide. The result was pretty amazing. Over 300 community members showed up to attend the town council meeting in opposition to this letter. Randy told me that there was people everywhere in the halls, outside on the sidewalks, peeking in through the windows just to get a glimpse. And opposition ignited within this tiny North Carolina community and began spreading to communities up and down the Atlantic coast. This was the beginning of what Oceana and our partners call the resolution revolution. And we got to the point where over 90% of the coastal towns in the region passed resolutions opposing new offshore oil and gas drilling. So in 2015, as we had anticipated, the Atlantic coast came under threat. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management under President Obama issued a draft plan to offer areas in the mid-Atlantic and Southeast, this was off the coast of Virginia, the Carolinas, and Georgia, to offshore drilling. Oceana and our allies went to work mobilizing the very communities and leaders and scientists and educators and officials and businesses and stakeholders that we had been organizing for the past 2 years since Kure Beach, and to get them to speak out against this plan. Notably, this groundswell of opposition spanned across political divides, which would become even more important in the coming years. Republicans and Democrats alike, from constituents to council members to governors and members of Congress, were all willing to speak out to protect their coast. And we were successful, wildly successful. When BOEM, so that's Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM, announced the next draft of the drilling plan in 2016, the Atlantic lease areas had been removed, and they explicitly listed grassroots opposition as one of the major reasons why. It was an incredible and unprecedented victory. That year, President Obama even went so far as to permanently protect large portions of the Arctic and a string of canyons off the mid and North Atlantic coast from offshore drilling, as well as deny the pending permits to conduct seismic airgun blasting at the Atlantic. This was all done right before Obama left office. It was a testament to the work of a true movement to protect our coast. Dun, dun, dun. And then Donald Trump was elected. Soon after he took office, Trump issued an executive order 13795, implementing an America First offshore energy strategy, which rescinded Obama's withdrawals, expedited seismic permitting, among other very bad things. He and his administration took action to reopen and expedite the same permits to conduct seismic airgun blasting in the Atlantic, revoke the drilling protections in the Atlantic and Arctic issued by President Obama, and kickstart the development of an aggressive new drilling plan. The Department of the Interior issued a secretarial order to implement Trump's order. This was in May of 2017, and to immediately start developing a new 5-year plan with a special emphasis on the mid and South Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, and Alaska. We had already won once before, but under President Obama, we knew the administration was generally favorable to our cause and needed political cover to do what we wanted them to do, which was protect the Atlantic. The Trump administration was aggressively pro-fossil fuel development, and it was clear they wanted to expand drilling in the places we had worked so hard to protect. We knew our challenge would be greater and the odds stacked higher against us, but we could not give up. And I just wanted to show you, this was the map outlining the Trump proposal, showing nearly all of our US federal waters being proposed for offshore drilling, oil and gas. Next slide. So I wanted to congratulate you because you've made it almost midway through my presentation, and I call this the palate cleanser. We're going to feel really good because when this proposal was issued, opposition was fierce and it was nationwide. I could spend an hour showing you photos and videos of rallies, protests, letters submitted, and I wanted to highlight, this is a, before you press play, we had probably 10 different groups that came together in Laguna Beach. We had Surfrider Foundation, political groups, grassroots groups. We had a mermaid, and we had Ted Danson. We had elected officials from congressional members down to the city council mayor. Really, really impressive to show united opposition to offshore drilling, and this was happening nationwide. So go ahead and share that and enjoy.
What do we say to toxic beaches? No offshore drilling! What do we say to ocean dead zones? No offshore drilling! What do we say to save our coastline? No offshore drilling! What do we say to oil spill? No offshore drilling! What do we say? No offshore drilling! What do we say? No offshore drilling!
As many of you know, in early January, the federal government announced a draft plan for the 5-year leasing of oil and gas off our U.S. coast. And for the first time, and for the first time in nearly 40 years, California was in that draft plan. And so we are here today as Californians, as Americans, to say we do not accept offshore oil drilling on our coast.
Coastal communities like Laguna Beach and coastal communities all around the nation have nothing to gain and everything to lose from this. We have an incredibly thriving economy in our coastal communities. 150 million people come visit the beaches in California every year. They spend about $20 billion injecting an incredible amount of money into our coastal economy and support 376,000 jobs in the state of California. So we don't need it for jobs, we don't need it for the economy. It's only going to harm all of those things.
This has to end. This nightmare has to end. This of giving away every precious resource that we have, of not having a rational policy to promote energy development that is not based upon a carbon-based economy, but that really talks about renewables and alternative energy, wind and solar. And we can do it. California is demonstrating that it can be done.
And you know, I was thinking about this, that's not bad. Really, it's not. This is what we're supposed to be doing in life. We're supposed to be defending, standing up for, rejoicing in this astounding California coast that we have been gifted. So I would recommend keeping a light heart. We're exporting oil to other countries at this point. So do we want to put that at risk for another country if you want to be nationalistic about it? You know, no, you don't. Is it going to change the price at the pump? You know, no, it's not. Keep love in your heart and fight like hell. Thank you.
Thank you. And so hopefully that leaves a lightness in your heart to see how many people came together in opposition to drilling. And yes, that was in California, but all the talking points are relevant to the state of Maine. And it wasn't just fierce opposition on one coast, it was everywhere, including from Mainers as well, prompting more than 250 coastal Maine business owners and 4 chambers of commerce to oppose the plan. Thousands of residents submitted comments in opposition, and Maine's entire congressional delegation joined with other New England senators and representatives to introduce bills to block offshore oil and gas drilling. So Maine has a legislature that has banned offshore drilling in your state waters. Senator Collins and King have co-sponsored, co-sponsored the New England Coastal Protection Act. A religious letter of over 300 groups was submitted to Trump, including 15 religious groups from Maine. The opposition was fierce indeed. Next slide. And for good reason. Maine has 3,478 miles of coastline. Maine supports a clean coast economy with around 60,000 jobs and supports $3.8 billion in gross domestic product. And this does not include the fossil fuel industry. This is through activities such as tourism, recreation, and fishing. And when you think back to the BP Deepwater Horizon disaster, we saw how an offshore spill does not know any boundaries and threatens thousands and thousands of miles of coastline, having devastating economic impacts. The oil spill would threaten coastal jobs, fisheries, tourism, recreation. And when the Obama administration proposed opening parts up of the mid-Atlantic to drilling, the business voice played a crucial role in highlighting the value of a clean coast economy. A handful of business owners came together at that time and in coordination with Oceana formed the Business Alliance for Protecting the Atlantic Coast, which currently represents over 45,000 businesses up and down the Atlantic coast opposed to new offshore oil drilling. This includes chambers of commerce, tourism boards, restaurant associations, realtor associations, and the fishing industry. Just last week, Hospitality Maine, which represents 1,200 business owners in Maine, lended their name to the fight, and just this past Monday sent a letter into Senator Collins and Angus King, telling them to please oppose any new offshore oil drilling. So, as I said, as part of this growing opposition, the business voice became a crucial and powerful component to our campaign. The Business Alliance has taken action in a variety of different ways over the past few years, from engaging with local elected officials, speaking at public events and hearings, submitting comment letters to both local and federally elected officials. And as you can see here in the image, representatives from the Atlantic Coast, Pacific Coast, and Florida Gulf Coast Business Councils, there's 3 of them, which represent close to 55,000 members in total, met directly with the Deputy Director of the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management, Walter Cruikshank, about the business opposition to new drilling, and this was November of 2019. On 2 different occasions, representatives from the Business Alliance were invited to testify before the House Natural Resources Committee on the issue of drilling and how drilling would negatively impact the clean coast economy. So if anyone here is a business owner and would like to take the next level of action, we please consider joining the Business Alliance for Protecting the Atlantic Coast. Thanks, Ben. So where are we now? It was you can only imagine from 2010 to now, the story is really complex, and I did the best I could to sort of high speed and highlight how much has gone on from when Obama proposed opening things up to the BP Horizon, to a groundswell of opposition, to Trump proposing opening up almost everything, to even more opposition. We really have turned the tide, and we have strong bipartisan allies in Congress, and every East and West Coast governor, both Republican and Democrat alike, are on our side. At the start of the pandemic, we all had to reimagine how to make a difference, and I'm proud to say we've done just that. Just before the election last year, President Trump held a major rally announcing a 10-year offshore drilling ban for Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. And last year, President Biden announced a pause on all new offshore oil and gas leasing, as well as an exciting commitment to advance offshore wind. And neither of these actions would have been possible if we had not found ways to keep up the pressure. So Oceana and our coalition partners, this was just a huge effort around the nation. We collectively made drilling so unpopular as a political move right before the election. Donald Trump, well, the one that Donald Trump ended up losing, even Trump withdrew through his executive order the following areas from his leasing plan. And he did that under his presidential moratorium. So, and you'll see the 3 areas there that were removed from his plan. In the short term of 3 years, this amazing grassroots organizing movement moved President Trump from proposing the most radical expansion of offshore drilling we've ever seen to making the popular political decision to use his presidential powers to exclude the areas from drilling. So the process, I love this slide because it's really complicated, but it's not. So the process of drilling or approving, for plan, I just totally got caught up. So the process for oil and gas leasing, exploration, and development involves a series of well-defined steps that are supposed to protect the interests of the public, the federal government, and businesses. So waters more than 3 miles from the shoreline and to the end of the continental shelf, which is about 200 nautical miles, are considered the property of the United States government, legally defined as the country's exclusive economic zone. Like any property owner who wants to ensure their property will be used in a manner consistent with their wishes, the government establishes rules and regulations for its use and offers leases for the development of those resources. The process is spelled out in the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act and follows a prescribed schedule. Congress passed this law in 1953 and has amended it several times since. The law divides the Outer Continental Shelf into 4 management areas: the Alaska, Pacific, Gulf of Mexico, and Atlantic. Lease sales occur in 5-year blocks, with each area allotted a time frame in which leases are available for purchase. And right now, we are currently under the 2017 to 2022 plan as proposed by the Trump administration. So the president can withdraw whole areas under his authority, as Obama did with Atlantic and Arctic. Presidents are required to create and issue 5-year plans. And so we are actually waiting for the Biden administration to issue its proposed program. Congress can also pass laws that can put moratoriums in place. The president under OXLA can withdraw areas from future leasing. He can also affect in his 5-year plan the number of lease sales that can happen. And this is the issue. We just don't know what that's going to look like yet under the Biden administration. And states can also control their state waters. For example, Florida has a ban on offshore drilling. And in June of 2019, Governor Janet Mills signed a measure that would ban offshore oil and gas drilling in Maine state waters. So the National Outer Continental Shelf Oil and Gas Leasing Program establishes a schedule of oil and gas lease sales proposed for planning areas of the Outer Continental Shelf. This program specifies the size, timing, and location of potential leasing activity that the Secretary of the Interior determines will best meet our national energy needs. And this just shows you the planning areas. And I think this is probably redundant, but just to reiterate why we need a 5-year program, and how it's regulated by the Department of the Interior and then implemented through the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management. It requires the Secretary of the Interior to prepare a program that consists of a 5-year schedule and then what meets our energy needs. BOEM is tasked with identifying the ocean areas to be leased and scheduling those lease sales during the following 5 years. And then when developing this program, BOEM also has to consider the effect of leasing on the environment and the communities. So how do we engage in this process? Again, for President Biden's 5-year plan, there's still a lot that we don't know. We don't know if he'll completely scrap the current plan and start from scratch or just modify the current plan. More answers will come after the release of the secretarial order. BOEM will most likely not hold their traditional meetings around the 5-year plan due to COVID, so those will be virtual. The meetings and then a 90-day public comment period offer another opportunity to push for protections by generating public comments. And so if you feel completely overwhelmed, and that was a lot of information, let's summarize. We, Oceana, see that there are 2 roads to victory for permanently protecting our coastlines from new offshore drilling, including Maine's coastline, through legislation or through executive action. Through legislation, the House passed the Build Back Better Act last year, which contained a provision to protect the Atlantic, Pacific, and Eastern Gulf of Mexico. And that passed, which is fantastic. Unfortunately, It has not gone to the floor yet in the Senate. You probably have heard that Joe Manchin has reservations about the provision. Should it come to vote through budget reconciliation, Oceana will work very hard to make sure this includes House protections. Or the second way is through executive action. And let me be clear, if President Biden stopped all new leasing, this would not end offshore production on the current leases, nor would it prevent future production on the over 8 million acres of unused leases that have already been approved. The United States is the top oil producing country, and we are a net exporter of petroleum. So the United States is currently approaching record levels of domestic oil production, and we are on track to break that record next year. So any new leasing for offshore drilling development would lock in decades more fossil fuel infrastructure that would continue to pollute our atmosphere and continue to drive climate change for decades to come. Right at the moment when it's vital that we draw down dirty carbon emitting energy and transition to clean renewables. So again, the executive action would only stop new oil and gas leasing. And what is budget reconciliation? Again, we think this is probably our only chance to get permanent protections enacted from Congress this year. So right now, Congress is negotiating a budget reconciliation package that includes substantial economic and climate-focused measures. Due to the nature of budget reconciliation, measures must involve changes to federal spending on incoming revenues. Unlike other legislation, which requires 60 votes to pass Senate, budget reconciliation only requires a simple majority. This package is a promising opportunity to enact legislation establishing permanent protections against offshore drilling in this session of Congress. Biden committed to ending new offshore drilling during his election campaign, and budget reconciliation is offering him that opportunity. So what's the next steps? The reconciliation bill, as I said, passed the House in November. It contains offshore drilling protections. The Senate must now include this language in their reconciliation legislation. So on the Senate side, we need to convince any on-the-fence senators. This includes encouraging freshman senators and our champions to cheerlead this. We need a senator to make including offshore drilling protections a priority to include in the larger package. So though Senator Collins might be opposed to a broader final budget reconciliation package, we can still earn her support to add the House's drilling protections back into the final bill in a separate vote. Coastal communities do not want offshore oil drilling. We have bipartisan and widespread opposition. We have support for protecting our coasts from groups including nearly every East and West Coast governor. More than 390 coastal municipalities have passed resolutions. East and West Coast business alliances representing over 55,000 businesses. We have the Pacific, New England, South Atlantic, and Mid-Atlantic fishery management councils and several commercial and recreational fishing interests opposed to new offshore drilling. It's more important than ever that we move away from our dependence on fossil fuels and rapidly expand investments in clean, renewable energy. Investing in this clean, renewable domestic energy production will protect our economy from erratic fluctuations in global prices, oil prices that can be manipulated by autocrats like Putin. Expanding offshore drilling would be a catastrophic mistake for our economy and our climate while doing nothing to help lower gas prices. More drilling leaves us vulnerable to global rises in oil and gas prices led by those same autocrats and massive oil spill disasters, which threaten thriving coastal communities that depend on clean oceans. It's time to end big oil's stranglehold on our economy and accept that we cannot drill our way to lower gas prices. More drilling means more spilling, which coastal economies cannot afford. We can secure our energy independence through investments in clean energy. And so now we encourage you to take action. We finally get to the, what are they asking us to do? So the decision makers are definitely listening. They hear from groups like Oceana all the time, So who they especially need to hear from right now is you, their constituents. From phone calls to emails to social media and online event meetings, we are urging you to contact your senators. Maine senators are extremely influential in the current and ongoing negotiations. We need them to hear from you, urging them to fight for permanent offshore drilling protections. And also, if you are a business owner in the state of Maine, please consider joining the Business Alliance for Protecting the Atlantic Coast. We have power in numbers. You can follow Oceana on social media. Maine conservation voters will be following up with additional information in an email to all the participants today. And if we go to the next slide, if you're not familiar with the QR code, this will take you directly to an Oceana petition that will urge Biden and Congress to end new offshore oil drilling. And what you do is you simply hold up your phone as if you are going to take a picture of that blue square. So you use your smartphone right now, and if you hold it up, and we can leave that slide up for a minute, I hope, through Kathleen, if that's okay. So you don't take a picture of it, it should just automatically show you a link, and you go ahead and touch that, and it will pull up the Oceana petition. And I just want to thank you again to the Maine conservation voters, to Kathleen and Will for setting up this lunch and learn. It's been a pleasure to share our knowledge about the history from 2010 to today, to give you a little bit more on the process of offshore oil drilling, to hopefully give you a taste of the political landscape, but also show you that there is national opposition to new drilling, and that we need every voice in Maine to speak up and lean on Senators King and Collins to do the right thing to protect Maine's coastline. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for that incredible presentation and for all of the work that you do to protect our oceans. So yes, absolutely do that QR code trick and sign your name to that petition. But as you can probably anticipate, you will get a follow-up email from us later this afternoon with a link to the recording, as well as a link to an action alert that'll make it super easy for you to send a message directly to Senator Collins and directly to Senator King, asking them to protect our oceans once and for all. So look for that this afternoon and keep sending those questions through the chat. We've got a good list to help us get started, and can't wait to hear more. So, Nancy, I don't know, there are a lot of threats going on and a lot of news coming at us, and I'm going to confess that I sort of thought this wasn't something we needed to worry about. Is there really a threat of drilling off the coast of Maine?
Thanks for that question. So there is oil off the coast of Maine. I believe New England has really made progress in transitioning to cleaner fuels. We look at Cape Cod, there's the wind projects off of Block Island and Martha's Vineyard. So most New Englanders sort of think to themselves, well, there's not going to be any drilling off of New England. Like, what is this? What is the urgency? But we have to remember that offshore drilling is still fueling the climate crisis. And, we have a responsibility to support the entire Atlantic coastline, not just the coast of Maine. And so we need to stand alongside other businesses that may be under threat of drilling. And your congressional leaders in the state of Maine still have a voice in that decision on Capitol Hill. And I also want to make sure I introduce my associate, Ben Davis. He's the Climate Association, Ben, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Sorry. Thank you, Nancy. I'm Oceana's Climate and Energy Campaign Associate.
Right.
So I work to help folks like Nancy and all of Oceana organize to ban offshore drilling and work on Oceana's climate and energy work.
I asked Ben to join because he spends morning, noon, and night working on this issue. So I know he will be helpful in answering some of these questions as well. So, Kathleen, a recent analysis found that permanent offshore drilling protections for all unleased federal waters could prevent over 19 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions, which is equivalent to taking every car in the nation off the road for the next 15 years. It would prevent more than 720 billion in damages associated with climate change to people, property, and the environment. For comparison, this is like losing the entire economy of a major city like Washington, D.C., Boston, or Atlanta for an entire year. Protecting the Atlantic, Pacific, and Eastern Gulf of Mexico would make a huge contribution towards ending all new leasing. So we have to step outside of just the main bracket and think about the much bigger picture for the Atlantic coastline, the economy, and the environment.
And Kathleen, I think it's also important to remember that as recently as 2 years ago, Maine's coast was opened up to proposed drilling. And though we do have a more friendly administration right now who controls the next 5-year program, we have no idea what the next administration could be. You know, obviously, we hope it's a climate-friendly administration, but we simply can't count on that, as we unfortunately learned in the last previous administration. So though it's great to think that Maine's coast is safe, just recently, unfortunately, it was proposed for new drilling. So getting permanent protections through Congress is the only way to ensure that that doesn't happen again.
And Ben, I think you're talking about the presidential administration, but of course, those same dynamics are at play in our state government, right? We right now have Governor Mills, you mentioned, Nancy, that Governor Mills has been firmly opposed to offshore drilling, but there is another candidate for governor in the fall, and we happen to know an awful lot about what he would do as governor because we've seen that show before. So we know that the risk can be very real.
Some of you may have just heard that Governor Mills Senator Collins just voted in support of expanding drilling in the Gulf of Mexico and Alaska. And so she may be vigilant in protecting the Maine coastline, but is still not voting correctly for all of our outer continental shelf. So we need to continue beating that drum and reminding her that we need to protect all of our coastlines from dirty and dangerous offshore oil drilling.
Yeah, that was a really frustrating and feels inconsistent to me, but both. So thank you for highlighting that. And Nancy, you talked a little bit about the sort of groups of voicing their opposition and the power of the faith-based advocacy against offshore drilling, of the business community. It seems like there are a lot of municipalities that are speaking out as well. Would it be helpful? Is it important to get more Maine municipalities to sign on and voice their opposition to offshore drilling?
I don't think there's anything wrong with opposition coming from any and all. You know, the more diverse the voices, the stronger that unified voice is, the more powerful we are. Absolutely. I think, was it Portland? I don't have it in front of me, but there was a couple of municipalities in Maine that passed offshore drilling resolutions, Portland and Belfast. And Oceana does have a map that shows, if you look on Google and look up Atlantic opposition to offshore drilling, if you just type that into Google for Oceana, there's a map that shows every single municipality, including the actual resolution, a link to the language, up and down the entire Atlantic coast.
That is terrific. And Ben, would you mind actually just putting that into the chat for everybody? Because there were a couple of folks who asked specifically for that Maine Portland resolution and for the Belfast resolution, and that seems like the easiest way to find it. So thank you.
No, Kathleen, we often also hear about what about the high gas prices? That's just a common question. And, you know, our answer to that is that we need to establish energy independence by relying on solar and wind power, clean, renewable energy, not fossil fuels, which are global commodities that can be manipulated. And big oil will continue to keep those prices artificially high. And also, any new drilling leases we would not see actual oil coming from that for probably close to 10 years. So any approval for drilling today is not going to see that actual outcome for nearly a decade. So it's just unrealistic to tie those two things together.
Thank you for clarifying that, because gas prices are high and people are concerned about that appropriately, but this is not the answer, right? It's not actually going to solve that.
No, and there are existing leases that are happening in the ocean. So that drilling is going to continue. Those have been through the permitting process. Those are still bringing oil in. We're trying to move forward and stop that into the future.
And can you say a little bit more about what's motivating the business opposition to offshore drilling? What's the logic there? I mean, I love it, but but what's the logic?
Oh gosh, I mean, I could go back to April 2010 on that one from the BP Horizon disaster. I mean, it's obvious the impact that businesses saw to the fishing industry, the tourism industry, the recreation industry. So I think it set the tone, particularly in the Gulf and Florida initially and the Southeast, when they saw proposals for that stretch of coastline being opened up and saw what that community in the Gulf experienced. It was devastating and still is rebounding. I mean, it's what, years later. Oh, right. Thank you, Ben. There was also a spill in Huntington Beach just last October, and it shut down the beaches for weeks. And that oil spill spread all the way to San Diego. So when you look at the impacts to the fisheries, to the seafood industry, the restaurants, I think it's pretty easy for a business owner to say, I'm going to do better with a clean coast economy than take a chance in supporting fossil fuels and that risk of an oil spill. And it's every step of the drilling process is dirty, it's dangerous, and it is connected to climate change. So those boats that have to go out there to do the air gun testing to find where that oil is devastating to marine life. Then that oil has to be, you have to put the platform out there, you have to drill for it. That's dangerous. We saw that with the BP disaster. Then that oil has to be transported. So we've seen the ship hull, I think in 1990, hull, an anchor cut into its own hull by accident, spilled all over Southern California. And then it still has to be transported onto shore. And in 2015, there was a spill in Refugio off of Santa Barbara where that pipeline was compromised. So that was trying to get it from the boat to land, and it spilled. And then you still have to do the refining on land, which contributes to poor air quality and often in frontline and low-income communities. So every step of the way, it's a risk.
And that's all before we actually burn the oil and
right.
Release the emissions. I mean, yes, okay.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you walking through that process, Nancy, and all of the places that there are vulnerabilities. I think we probably all have a couple of iconic disaster moments in our memories. For me, the first one, I'm going to date myself, was the Exxon Valdez, and just thinking, oh, well, obviously we have to stop this. Are these incidents pretty consistent? I mean, these are vulnerabilities, but how often do they cause harm? And what does that cleanup look like? It's really mind-boggling.
Yeah. Ben, do you have an answer to that one? I mean, it seems like every 5 to 10 years there's an incident. It's not like there are 30-year spans in between them. And we're just talking the United States. There's multiple incidents in other countries too. I think there was just a huge spill in, was it Peru?
Yeah, there was Peru off the coast of Mexico as well, in the Gulf of Mexico. There was a huge one last year. You might remember the viral moment where the ocean was on fire. That was due to offshore oil drilling. But it's actually, unfortunately, much worse than that. Nancy, you said you feel like there's one every 5 to 10 years. Those might be the ones that gain international headlines and really have an outsized, devastating impact in one big tragic event. But unfortunately, despite repeated promises from the industry that this time we're going to reform after Deepwater Horizon and it's safer. We're going to reform after Exxon Valdez. It's safer now. These companies again and again prove that it's not rare that oil spills in our beaches and in our ocean. In fact, in the past 10 years, between 2010 and 2020, there were over 6,000 documented spills, and that's more than 2 per day. So you think that every 5 years is a lot of spills. It's unfortunately even worse than we seem to think. And so the fact of the matter is that no offshore oil company can ensure that spills won't happen, and the rate of these spills is not decreasing. So it's just, as Nancy said, every step of the line of production is dirty and dangerous, and these spills are much more common than most people think.
And that is a wild number to now have stuck in my head. 2 spills a day. That is really terrible. Thank you for the facts that we need to fuel our advocacy. So it's hard in this moment, right? We're so polarized politically. Can we anticipate any sort of bipartisan support for offshore drilling bans, or is it pretty much guaranteed that if you've got an R after your name, you're pro drilling? Do you have any sense of what the political landscape looks like?
Oh, Ben, this one is, you can knock that one right out of the park. I know Ben knows the answer to this one, as
Thanks,
do I.
Nancy. I want to be clear, Nancy is a pro at this as well, but she's given me some screen time here. Yeah, so it seems that when it comes to offshore drilling, it's not what the typical partisan breakdown you'd expect. Nancy did such a great job describing the reliance so many coastal communities have on tourism, on beach recreation, and these communities are often represented by Republicans, and they know that their voters are opposed to offshore drilling because they know that their economy is run by clean coast industries. So when you look at Maine and Senator Collins, when you look at Florida, you see almost their entire bipartisan congressional delegation opposed to offshore drilling. And that's because Florida, the Sunshine State, is so reliant on tourism. So, unfortunately, the climate aspect of this debate is a little more partisan. But when you come to what people want and don't want in their communities, it's really quite bipartisan. People living on the coast don't want offshore drilling, whether they're in a community represented by a Republican or by a Democrat.
That's really encouraging. Thank you. That's some good news. And I know we've focused a lot on Senator Collins. Do we know how Senator King will vote on this?
I believe King has shown a great deal of support. Is that right, Ben? So Hospitality Maine sent in their letters to both King and Collins on Monday, and we have actually heard back from both offices saying that protecting our coastlines is in alignment with their position. Sort of the question mark that's lingering over my head is, will Collins go beyond the boundaries of Maine and back that up? And that's where Collins needs to hear from all of you.
Yeah, and the unfortunate aspect of offshore drilling in the United States is that so much of it is focused on the Gulf of Mexico. That's where industry really has the biggest footprint. So the political implications of Senator Collins saying she supports a drilling ban off the coast of Maine is kind of a little bit cowardly, because she knows that if she doesn't say anything about the Gulf of Mexico, maybe there won't be the industry blowback that there would be for supporting a total ban on new leasing everywhere. So it's really important. Senator King has been a champion in ending new leasing. And Senator Collins, we trust that she can get there with all this great advocacy that Nancy was talking about. She has a history of opposing drilling in the past, and we just need to continue to pester her and be good constituents.
I love that. And it's a great reminder that everyone will get a follow-up email later this afternoon. There'll be a button that you can click that will open up an email message that you can customize. So if you want to mention that you have heard this good news about their support and that you can't wait to see those positive votes taken, that's up to you. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Ben. I'll just pull the curtain back a little bit and say this has been just so much fun to collaborate with Oceana and putting this program together. We have really enjoyed it and are so delighted to share you and your expertise with our members and supporters. So thanks to everybody. I hope you will all join us next week. We are going to take a virtual tour of Portland. It will be a virtual tour focused on Black history and women's history, led by Dugan Murphy, who is a local historian who actually does these tours in person as well. He has a business called Portland by the Foot, and he's gonna show us what there is to see, and can't wait to explore with all of you next week. So thanks a million. Have a terrific weekend and look for that follow-up email later today.
Thank you.